Who is going to be the new World Chess Champion 2024? That is the big question, and we know it very, very soon. In this video, we're going to have a look at Game 9 of the match. 8 games have been played so far, and both Gukesh and Ding Liren have scored 4 points. It's tied, 6 more games to go. Anything can happen. Who has the best nerves? Who is playing the best moves on the board? Very important questions we will find out also in this video, but also in other videos to come. Gukesh is playing with the white pieces in game 9 and well, he opens now with the move 1d4. Knight f6, c4, e6, and here he goes for the move g3, going for the Catalan structure, fianchettoing his light squared bishop. Ding responds with bishop b4, bishop d2, bishop e7. This is a very solid system. If you see this for the first time, it does look strange to develop first the bishop to b4 and then back to e7, but there is some a lot of theory actually in these lines, and we will find out what the idea actually is. After bishop g2, d5, knight f3, castling kingside by both sides, very thematical, c6, queen c2, knight bd7, rook d1, b6. This is a position which has been seen thousands of times in Grandmaster games, and also Ding has quite a bit of experience here. Now the idea of that check on b4 we have seen earlier is that the bishop on d2 prevents the knight to be developed to d2. And now you can think the knight can also come to c3, but if you go to c3 there's always d takes c4, and therefore white usually moves the bishop away. Well, the most common move here is to bring the bishop to f4, so that later the knight can come to d2. But there are some, well, there is actually quite a lot of theory, but there are some drawbacks also to the move bishop f4, as very often the bishop can be targeted straight away with knight h5. So here Gukesh drops another opening surprise. What he has been doing basically in almost every game of this match, he played here the move bishop c3. And this is not a novelty. This has been played before, also by very strong grandmasters. But, well, the bishop does look a bit strange. I mean, black responded here with bishop b7, solid move. And the knight goes to d2. Why is this bishop strangely placed on c3? Well, it interferes the potential traffic on the c file. I mean, opening up the file is not a great idea. Taking on d5, it really shows that the bishop is strangely placed. But there are some advantages as well. With the bishop on c3, you're guarding more central squares, protecting the pawn, covering the e5 square, for instance. And now, after the move queen c7, rook ac1. So white has completed his development. All the pieces are nicely placed in the center. Black played here rook fd8, but as usual, Ding had already spent here about half an hour, and Gukesh, I think he was still pretty much in book. He knew what he was doing, and one of the other benefits of having placed the bishop on c3 is now white can also expand on the queen side by playing the move b4. And this is a nice move, grabbing space, and that is what Gukesh has been doing also in a lot of other games, playing quite aggressively with his pawns. He's grabbing space with the aim of placing the pawn on c5. And then you have a very nice bind, as for instance the bishop on b7 is very passive. The other pieces they can barely maneuver. Potential pawn breaks with e6, e5 have been prevented because bishop and knight and also the pawn on d4 are covering that square. So it's a critical moment in the game already. And how is black going to deal with it? Well, Ding played the best move in the position. He accepted the challenge here by playing the move c6, c5. Very interesting idea, as it opens up the position in the center. A lot of pawns can potentially be exchanged. And now people think, okay, this is going to be very boring. A lot of pieces are coming off the board. Well, I will show you. There are a lot of interesting tactical ideas in such positions. Pawn takes c5, capturing towards the center was played. Black recaptures with the b pawn. And now the move queen to b2. Why do you play this move? Well, first of all, you do add a bit more pressure on the b file, so the bishop got to be defended by the queen here still. But also the queen and bishop are working together on this diagonal. And on top of that, also the rook on c1 is adding more pressure to the black queen, potentially. I mean, there are still pawns in the center, but very soon this pawn block is going to be resolved. So here, for instance, if you do take on d4, which was not played in the game, but let me illustrate it. After bishop takes back, pawn takes c4, you take with the knight. I think in this position, only white can be a bit better here. There are potential problems. White pieces, they look more active. So I think black should be very careful choosing the right moment to release the tension. Well, instead of taking on d4, Ding played a good move. He played here the move knight to b6, adding pressure to the pawn on c4. And if you, for instance, would capture one of these pawns in the center, remember, there is also the idea to go knight a4, and here you can get rid of potentially a very good bishop. I mean, this bishop on an open long diagonal, that is usually becoming a huge monster. So rather than taking on c5, Gukesh played here the move bishop a5, pinning the knight on b6. The knight cannot really go away because then the queen on c7 will be hanging. But look at this. Pawn takes c4 was played now. Knight takes c4. And we have a very important moment here, as all of a sudden white is attacking the knight on b6 3 times. That knight has only been defended twice. So there's a huge threat. White is about to win a pawn or perhaps even more material. How to deal with that? Well, here again, Ding went in for a think, and well, he could actually have taken on c4. It's a very interesting line with a lot of calculation here going on. If you do take on c7 the queen on b2 will be hanging. Now, if you do take on c4 back, the queen can capture the bishop, but also white can capture the bishop on b7. And I'm not really sure. I think black is doing okay here, but also your bishop is hanging. And there are some problems. There is a bit of pressure on black's position. And apparently this is something Ding didn't really like. Instead of taking on c4, he decided here to take first with the bishop on f3. And why did he do that? Well, it's actually very understandable. We had looked already at the previous line that the bishop on b7 can be hanging. So if you do take back on f3, well, there is knight takes c4. And here black solves all the problems. In fact, he's going to win material, because if you take back, there's queen takes a5. And okay, you can take the rook on a8, but black is going to take back. And you have 2 minor pieces against the rook. That would be excellent news for black. So after bishop takes f3, very important moment, as knight takes c4 is coming up and the bishop on b7 not hanging, white first actually has to take on b6 to prevent knight takes c4 ideas for black. Now, the queen is under an attack, black recaptures, and there is bishop takes f3. The bishop hits the rook in the corner, but also remember that with the knight and the queen on b2, pawn on b6 is threatened to be taken. So therefore the rook moves to a6. And again, I mean, pieces have been exchanged, which is in a way good news. But I think, again, this is a very important moment in the game, as white probably has a nice try here, which Gukesh didn't go for. He could have gone for knight to e5. And actually it remembers me of yesterday's game, in which Ding with the white pieces also placed his knight on c6 at some point. It's a very nice square for the knight, even though there are perhaps no immediate threats. Well, apart from attacking the rook and the bishop, it's just a nuisance. It's very annoying for black to deal with at knight. You cannot easily get rid of it. So I think there is some sort of long-term pressure if white is allowed to install that knight there. White is just a bit better. However, Gukesh had a different, a more concrete idea in mind. And rather than putting the knight on e5 and followed by knight c6, he played here the move queen to b5. And with queen b5, you're attacking the rook on a6. Now the rook can take the pawn on a2, which was of course seen by Gukesh, but he can follow it up with knight takes b6. And here again, you see that there is tremendous pressure down the c-file. The pawn on c5 is pinned, cannot move, the pawn will be taken. And white anyway is about to take on c5, very likely at some point. But Ding has calculated very precisely, and he went now for the move queen a7. That's an excellent idea, a very important resource, as here, if you do take the pawn on c5, this all had to be calculated. It was not Gukesh's move in the game. There is rook takes d1, rook takes d1, and now with the move rook a5, you're attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, the pawn on c5 can be taken as it's covered by the bishop and the rook. So that's a very nice way to simplify for black. But instead of taking on c5, Gukesh went back with the queen to b1. Remarkable idea. What is the queen doing there? Well, it does keep an eye on that rook on a2. And very important, if you do take the pawn on c4, which is a very bad move, there is knight c8. That's a remarkable knight fork, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. The queen got to keep the bishop defended, but the queen is overloaded. It also has to keep the rook on a2 protected as well. So better black doesn't take on d4, but you see there are so many hidden tactical ideas for both sides. Rook b8 was played. Now black is setting up a counterattack against the knight on b6. But there is pawn takes c5. Very important move. And white is up a pawn. But with the move rook a6, black is fighting back. And apparently there are some difficulties holding on to the pawn on c5. If the pawn is going to move, well, then the knight on b6 is going to be hanging. So white tried here to move queen b5. But black had seen in advance there is bishop takes pawn, a very important tactical idea to equalize. As after taking the bishop, queen takes c5 was played. By the way, if you do take with the rook, it's very important that you take back with the rook from a6. The position is very even. If you do take with the queen, all of a sudden there's this amazing idea of queen c4 back, as you threaten ideas like rook c8 with back rank mate. But there's also rook c6 attacking the queen and the rook, and the queen on c4 keeps an eye on that rook on a6. So here white is going to win material. But as I said, rook takes b6 would have been the equalizer in case white would have taken with the rook on c5. But Gukesh decided to take with the queen. Now there is queen takes b6, and it's again very important that you have calculated deeper here, because the back rank checkmate idea with queen c8, well, that would be amazing. After rook takes c8, this is going to be checkmate. I mean, black can only block with the queen and the knight, but these pieces are going to be captured and it will be mate in the end. However, after queen c8, black must have seen that he can drop back with a knight to e8, and everything is perfectly under control, because the rook is protecting the knight, the queen is protecting the rook, and the position is just very even. Therefore, instead of queen c8, well, white played here the move queen takes b6, rook takes b6, but now play has been reduced to only one wing. Both sides have two rooks and a minor piece, but pieces are coming off the board. Rook c6, take, black move the pawn in front of his king to grab more space. But I mean, there's nothing really to play for. Both players, they played a few more moves, of course. You have to keep the pawn on e2 protected with the king. h3, h5, rook a1, rook c2, bishop b5. I mean, they don't really want to overdraw against each other. This is a psychological game. They play it out till the very end. 97, f4. Actually, there are different ways of playing. To be honest, I would not have played in Gukesh's way, but he's aiming for more pawn simplifications. The reason I don't like it is that after king f2, knight c5, there is a bit of pressure down the third rank, and white has to protect his bishop with the king. Knight takes d3, e takes d3, and definitely this is not the beauty prize for the most promising pawn structure. This is very anti-positional, but it's good enough to hold the balance here, of course. I mean, the pawn weaknesses are not looking nice, but they can easily be defended. If you go rook h2, there's always king g3, and the other pawn on d3, it can be defended from the side with the rook. King g6, rook b3 can make a waiting move. Black is making a bit of progress, but not too much. King f5, it's time to give a check and chase the king away. e5, pawn takes e5, rook takes d3 with check. The king goes away, you can take on h3, you even give up a pawn, but it doesn't matter, because with a rook's pawn only, this is a very easy draw, especially when the king is about to come into the corner. h4, king g2, rook g3, king h2, the king is in front of the pawn, there's no way to make progress. The king has been cut off along the fifth rank. Black played king g6, white makes a waiting move, rook g5, you can just exchange the rooks, king h3, and well, here Ding didn't really want to play till the very end, because if you play king h5 and the king goes into the corner, you put a pawn on h2, king on g3, it will be stalemate, very well-known draw. So instead Ding said, okay, king f6, you can take my pawn. Two kings left on the board. It is 4.5 in a very, very exciting match. And objectively, maybe this was not the most spectacular game of the match, but still, I think Gukesh really tried to do something with a small opening surprise. There were some practical problems to solve in the middle game, and maybe at some point White even had an edge, not only on the board, also on the clock. In the middle game at some point Ding was down an hour on the clock, but he played very well. Once he knew what he was doing, he consolidated very nicely, and well, looked like this was a very solid draw for him with the black pieces. So 5 more games to go. Ding has 3 more whites. It's going to be a very exciting final part of this World Chess Championship match. I hope you do like this video. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and help the channel to grow, guys. I'm really grateful for all your support. So thanks for that, and see you in Game 10 again. Bye bye.